Welcome to Midnight Whispers, the place where the cold breathes and the dark listens. Tonight we're bound for Alaska, land of endless snowfields, ghost towns under ice, and roads that end without warning. Up here, silence isn't empty, it's alive, waiting. The stories you're about to hear are true, drawn from legends, and whispered by those who swore they'd never tell. Subscribe now and tap the bell so the next time we drift into the cold, you're with us. Pull your blanket close, dim the lights, and let the first tale rise like a storm over the tundra. Story 1. What stole our childhoods. I woke up on a Tuesday morning in February 2006 and could not remember my mother's face. Not just fuzzy around the edges, completely gone. I knew I had a mother, knew her name was Helen, knew she raised me in Wasilla, Alaska until I was 18. But when I tried to picture her face, there was nothing. Just a blank space in my mind where she should have been. Like someone had taken an eraser to that part of my memory and scrubbed it clean. I was 41 years old, living in the same town where I grew up. I worked at the hardware store on Main Street, same job for 15 years. My life was routine, predictable, boring. And then one morning, a piece of my past just vanished. I thought maybe I was having a stroke. Grabbed my phone and called my sister in Anchorage. Asked her to describe Mom. She rattled off details. Brown hair, green eyes, that crooked smile. But as she spoke, nothing clicked. The description meant nothing to me. I could have been listening to her describe a stranger. My sister got worried, told me to go to the hospital. I promised I would, but I did not. Because that same morning, something else happened that scared me more than forgetting my mother's face. I ran into Tom Bradshaw at the gas station. Tom and I played Little League together. Spent every summer as kids riding bikes around the neighborhood. He was as close to a best friend as I ever had. When I saw him, I waved. He looked right through me. Not like he was ignoring me. Like he genuinely did not know who I was. I walked over and said his name. He turned, confused. I reminded him we grew up together. Played baseball. Built that treehouse behind his house when we were 12. He just stared at me with this blank expression. Then he apologized and said he did not remember any of that. Did not remember having a treehouse. Did not remember playing Little League. Said his childhood was kind of fuzzy anyway. That was when I knew something was wrong. Not with me. With Wasilla itself. Over the next few days, I started asking around. Casual questions. Testing people. And what I found chilled me to the bone. People all over town were losing memories. Specific memories. Always from childhood. Always without explanation. Sarah Chen at the post office could not remember learning to read. The memory was just gone. She knew she must have learned at some point, but the experience itself had vanished from her mind. Mike Patterson, who ran the diner, had forgotten his father. Not that his father had died. He remembered that part, but he could not remember what the man looked like. Could not recall his voice. Could not picture a single moment they had shared. Nobody was talking about it openly. It was too strange, too impossible. But in quiet conversations, in whispers, the truth came out. Something was stealing our childhoods, one memory at a time. I started keeping a list, writing down everyone who reported missing memories. By the end of the first week, I had 23 names. By the end of the second week, I had 47. All from Wasilla, all within a 2-mile radius of downtown. The memories were not random. They were targeted, specific moments of innocence, first days of school, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, summer vacations, the foundation stones of who we were as children. Someone or something was reaching into our minds and plucking them out like flowers from a garden. I went to the police, showed them my list. The desk sergeant looked at me like I was insane, asked if I had been drinking. I tried to explain, but the words sounded crazy even to me. He told me to go home and get some rest. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to remember anything concrete from my childhood, trying to hold on to what was left. But the harder I tried, the more I realized how much was already gone. Entire years had been reduced to vague impressions, feelings without context, ghosts of memories. And then I heard it, a sound outside my window. Soft, rhythmic, like breathing, but too slow, too deliberate. I got up and looked out. The street was empty, but the sound continued. And I realized it was not coming from outside. It was coming from inside my head, from inside my memories. I stumbled back from the window. The breathing grew louder, and with it came images, flashes of my childhood. But they were wrong, distorted, like looking at old photographs through water. I saw myself at 7 years old, playing in the yard. But my face was blurred. Then I saw myself at 10, riding my bike. But the bike was gone. I was just sitting in midair, legs pedaling nothing. The memories were being edited, rewritten, and something was in there with me, moving through my past like a thief in a house, taking what it wanted, leaving holes behind. I grabbed my jacket and drove to the hospital. If people were reporting physical symptoms, there would be records, evidence, something concrete. The night nurse recognized me, let me wait in the lobby while she checked recent admissions. She came back 15 minutes later with a printout. In the past 2 weeks, 31 people had come to the ER complaining of memory loss. All childhood memories, all from Wasilla. The doctors had run every test. CT scans, MRIs, blood work. Everything came back normal. No physical cause, no medical explanation. They were sending people home with recommendations for therapy. But therapy could not fix this. This was not trauma, not repression. This was theft. I stayed up all night researching, digging through old newspapers, local history, looking for any pattern, any clue. And I found something. An obituary from 1987. A woman named Margaret Voss had died in Wasilla. She had been an elementary school teacher for 40 years. The obituary mentioned she had no family, no children of her own. She had dedicated her entire life to teaching, to children. And then I found her photo, an old yearbook picture from Wasilla Elementary. I stared at that face, and something clicked. I remembered her, vaguely. She had been my third-grade teacher. But I could not remember the classroom, could not remember a single lesson. Just her face, watching me, always watching. I drove to the old elementary school. It had been closed for years, condemned, windows boarded up, but I needed to see it, needed to find something that would prove I was not losing my mind. The front door was unlocked. Someone had broken the chain. I stepped inside. The smell hit me immediately. Mildew and rot. The hallways were dark. Lockers hung open like mouths. I used my phone flashlight to navigate. I found her classroom. Room 12. The nameplate was still on the door. Margaret Voss, 3rd grade. I pushed it open. Desks still lined up in rows. Chalkboard covered in dust. And on the wall, dozens of photos. Old class pictures, faded and yellowed. Students from the 70s, 80s, 90s. All staring at the camera with gap-toothed smiles. And every single face had been scratched out, deliberately defaced, like someone had taken a knife and carved through them. I felt cold, colder than I had ever been. And I realized the breathing sound was back, coming from somewhere in the room. From behind me, I turned slowly. She was standing in the corner. Not a ghost, not exactly, more like an impression, a shadow of a person. Margaret Voss, or what was left of her. She did not move, did not speak, just stood there, and I felt her inside my mind, sorting through my memories, pulling them out, examining them, keeping the ones she wanted. I understood then, she had no children of her own, so she was collecting ours. Every childhood memory she stole, she added to herself, building a family from fragments, from stolen moments that were never hers. I ran, crashed through the school doors and into the parking lot. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I drove home and locked every door, every window, but I knew it would not matter. She was not outside. She was already in, already moving through the minds of everyone in Wasilla, taking what she needed. The memory theft stopped after 2 weeks. 47 people total, all of us missing pieces of our childhoods. The authorities called it mass hysteria, suggested there was something in the water, but they never found anything, never explained it. I moved away 6 months later, could not stay in that town, could not walk past that school, but the memories never came back. My mother, whose face is still gone. My best friend from childhood is a stranger. Entire years of my life exist only as blank spaces. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear the breathing, feel something moving through what is left of my past. And I wonder how much more she will take before there is nothing of me left at all. Just an empty shell of a man who once was a child. Once had a mother. Once had a childhood worth remembering. Before Margaret Voss decided those memories belonged to her instead. Story 2. Missing minutes. There are 6 minutes of my life that do not exist, and I share them with 146 other people who refuse to talk about it. I was on Alaska Airlines Flight 1862 from Anchorage to Seattle on March 14, 2004. A routine flight. I had flown it dozens of times for work. I sold industrial equipment to fishing operations along the coast, which meant I spent half my life in airports and the other half in cheap hotels. That day felt like every other day, until it did not. We were 40 minutes into the flight, cruising over the Gulf of Alaska at 37,000 feet. I was reading a magazine article about bass fishing, half paying attention, when I felt the plane shudder. Not turbulence, something else. A vibration that started in my chest and spread outward, like standing too close to a massive speaker. The cabin lights flickered once, twice, then everything went dark. When the lights came back on, I was staring at a different page in my magazine. An advertisement for truck tires. I had no memory of turning the page. None. I looked at my watch. 6 minutes had passed. I checked the seat back screen showing our flight path. We had traveled 53 miles, but I had no memory of any of it. 6 minutes of my life just gone. Around me, other passengers were stirring. Confused expressions. People checking their phones and watches. A woman 2 rows up kept touching her face like she was making sure it was still there. The businessman across the aisle was staring at his laptop screen with pure terror in his eyes, even though the screen was black. Nobody said anything. We all just sat there in this terrible silence, knowing something had happened but not knowing what. The pilot came on the intercom. His voice was steady but wrong somehow. Too controlled, like he was reading from a script. He apologized for a brief communications issue. Said everything was fine now. Said we would be landing in Seattle on schedule, but I could hear something underneath his words. Fear. The kind of fear you get when you realize the rules of reality are more flexible than you thought. I tried to remember those 6 minutes. I closed my eyes and pushed my mind back, trying to find even a fragment. Nothing. Just a blank space where time should be. Like someone had taken scissors to my memory and cut out a section. Clean edges. No rough transitions. Just before and after with nothing in between. The flight attendants moved through the cabin with drink carts, acting normal. But their hands were shaking, and they would not make eye contact with passengers. One of them, a woman maybe 50 years old with gray streaks in her dark hair, passed my row 3 times without offering me anything. On the 3rd pass, I saw she was crying. Silent tears running down her face while she smiled and asked people if they wanted peanuts or pretzels. We landed in Seattle without incident. But as we taxied to the gate, I noticed something. Every single person on that plane was gripping their armrests. White knuckles, rigid postures, like we were still 37,000 feet up and falling. And nobody was talking. A plane full of people, and the only sound was the engine and the wheels on the tarmac. I should have left it alone. Should have gotten off that plane and gone home and forgotten about 6 missing minutes in a life full of forgotten moments. But I could not. Something about the blankness of it bothered me. The completeness of the erasure. So I started digging. The FAA incident report was public record. I found it online 3 days after the flight. According to the report, Flight 1862 had experienced a complete communications blackout for approximately 6 minutes while over the Gulf of Alaska. All radio contact lost. Transponder signal vanished. On radar, the plane had simply ceased to exist. Then, 6 minutes later, it reappeared. Same altitude, same heading, same speed. Like nothing had happened. But something had happened. The report mentioned that air traffic control had scrambled 2 F-15 fighters from Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson. Standard procedure for a plane that goes dark. The jets reached our last known position 13 minutes after we disappeared. They found nothing. Empty sky. Then, 3 minutes later, Flight 1862 reappeared on radar, 67 miles from where it had vanished. 67 miles in 6 minutes. That would mean we were traveling at over 600 miles per hour. Our cruising speed was 530. I started calling other passengers. It took weeks to track down their information, but I am persistent when something bothers me. Most would not talk. They hung up the moment I mentioned the flight number. But a few were like me. They needed to understand. They needed to know what happened in those 6 minutes. A retired teacher named Margaret told me she woke up with a nosebleed. She had been reading a book, and when the lights came back on, her nose was bleeding and there were drops of blood on the pages. She had no memory of the bleeding starting, no sensation of it happening. Just suddenly blood where there should not be blood. A software engineer named David said his laptop had been running when the lights went dark. When they came back on, the battery was completely dead. 6 minutes should have drained maybe 3%. Instead, it was empty, like something had pulled every electron out of it in an instant. A flight attendant I will not name told me that during those 6 minutes, according to the cockpit voice recorder, nobody said anything. Not the pilots, not the crew. Complete silence. But the recorder had picked up another sound, a low-frequency hum that hurt to listen to, the kind of sound you feel in your bones more than hear with your ears. The FAA had classified that recording. She only knew about it because her union representative had seen it during the investigation. I started having dreams, not nightmares exactly, more like memories trying to surface. In the dreams, I am on the plane, but the cabin is different. The walls are transparent. I can see outside, and we are not flying through clouds. We are flying through something else, Something thick and dark that presses against the windows like deep ocean water. And there are shapes moving in it. Massive things that dwarf the plane. Things that watch us pass with interest that feels almost hungry. I wake up from these dreams with my hands clenched so tight my nails draw blood from my palms. And every time, I have the same thought. We went somewhere. During those 6 minutes, Flight 1862 went somewhere else. Somewhere the laws of physics work differently. Somewhere things exist that should not exist. And then we came back. But we did not come back alone. I know this because of what started happening to the passengers. 3 months after the flight, a man named Robert Chen died in his sleep in Portland. Heart attack, the coroner said. He was 34 years old. Healthy, no history of heart problems. But I remembered him from the plane. He had been sitting near the front, and when the lights came back on, he had been staring straight ahead with this expression of absolute horror frozen on his face. 6 months after the flight, a woman named Lisa Kowalski drove her car into the Puget Sound. Deliberately, witnesses said she accelerated toward the water. She left a note that just said over and over, "I can still feel it watching. I can still feel it watching. I can still feel it watching." 47 times on a single page. I started keeping a list. Every passenger I could track. Every crew member, checking obituaries, news reports, social media. In 3 years, 19 people from that flight have died. Suicides mostly. A few accidents that seemed too convenient. One woman walked into the woods near Juneau and was never found. They searched for 2 weeks. Nothing. Like she had simply ceased to exist. The rest of us are changed. I can feel it in myself. A heaviness that was not there before. A sense of being watched even in empty rooms. And the dreams are getting clearer. More detail. I can almost remember now what happened in those 6 minutes. What we saw. What saw us. We passed through something. A thin place where our reality brushes against something else. Something vast and old and patient. And it noticed us. This tiny metal tube full of fragile human bodies, flying through its territory. And it reached out, not to harm us, just to touch us, to mark us, to remember us. The worst part is the certainty that it is still there. Still waiting, still watching all of us who pass through its space. I can feel its attention on me sometimes, heavy as a physical weight. Usually at night, usually when I am alone. And I know with absolute conviction that it is patient. That it can wait years or decades or centuries. That time means nothing to something that exists in the spaces between spaces. I am writing this because I need someone to know what happened. The FAA buried it, called it an equipment malfunction. The airline paid everyone a small settlement to keep quiet. Most passengers signed the non-disclosure agreement without hesitation. They wanted to forget. They wanted to pretend those 6 minutes never happened. But they did happen, and whatever touched us during those 6 minutes left something behind. A connection, a thread, and I could feel it pulling tighter. Drawing us back. One by one, the passengers from Flight 1862 are disappearing. Not dying anymore, just vanishing, like they are being called home to a place they do not remember visiting. Last week, I booked a flight from Anchorage to Seattle. Same route, same airline, different flight number, but the same path over the Gulf of Alaska. I do not know why I am doing this, or maybe I do know and I am lying to myself. Maybe I want to go back. Maybe I need to understand. Maybe the thing that touched us has been calling me this whole time, and I am finally ready to answer. My flight leaves tomorrow at 2:15 p.m. We will be over the Gulf of Alaska around 3 p.m. I keep checking the weather reports. Clear skies. No turbulence expected. Perfect flying conditions. But I know that what happened to us had nothing to do with weather. It had to do with being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or maybe the right place at the right time, depending on your perspective. I have not told anyone where I am going. I closed my bank accounts yesterday. Gave my apartment keys to my landlord. It feels like preparing for a journey I will not return from. And maybe that is exactly what this is. Maybe all of us who were on that flight are meant to go back. Maybe that brief touch was just a preview, an invitation. And now it is time to accept. Tonight, I will dream of transparent cabin walls again. Of thick darkness pressing against the windows. Of massive shapes moving with impossible grace through spaces that should not exist. And this time, I think I will remember. This time, I think I will understand what we saw in those 6 missing minutes. And I think I will realize that they were never missing at all. They are still happening, right now, forever, caught in a loop in a place where time does not flow forward but spirals inward. And all 147 of us are still there, still trapped in those 6 minutes, still being watched by something that has no end and no beginning. We never left. We are still flying through that darkness. This life I am living now is just an echo, A dream the plane is having while it exists in that other place. And tomorrow, when I get on that flight over the Gulf of Alaska, I will finally wake up and realize I have been asleep for 20 years in a moment that lasts forever. Story 3. Shadows that stayed. I need to tell you what happened on the Homer Spit in 1999. Because nobody else will. The official record says 3 tourists went missing. What it does not say is that their shadows never left. I was working maintenance for the Land's End Resort that summer, 26 years old and trying to save enough money to get back to the lower 48. Homer, Alaska is beautiful in June. The Spit stretches out into Kachemak Bay like a crooked finger, 4.5 miles of gravel and weathered wood pointing toward the mountains across the water. Tourists come for the halibut fishing, the art galleries, the end-of-the-world feeling you get standing at the very tip of that narrow strip of land with nothing but ocean on 3 sides. June 15th was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were slow, and I was replacing warped boards on the main boardwalk when I first saw them. 3 people, a man in his 50s wearing khaki shorts and a camera around his neck. A younger woman, maybe 30, with blonde hair and a ponytail. And a teenage boy who looked bored and sunburned. They were standing near the harbormaster's office, about 50 yards from where I was working, taking pictures of the fishing boats. The light was strange that day, flat and gray despite the cloudless sky, like looking at the world through dirty glass. The wind had died completely, which never happens on the Spit. The place is famous for its constant breeze. But that morning, the air hung still and heavy, and the only sound was the creak of boats against their moorings. I watched the 3 tourists walk toward the end of the boardwalk, toward the small beach area where people sometimes dig for razor clams. They moved slowly, stopping every few feet to point at something or adjust the camera. Normal tourist behavior, unremarkable in every way. Then they stepped onto a section of boardwalk about 200 feet ahead of me, and I felt something shift in my chest. A pressure change, like when you drive too fast down a mountain. My ears popped, the hammer slipped from my hand and clattered against the boards. When I looked up, the 3 tourists were gone. Not walked away, not around a corner, gone. Vanished in the space between one heartbeat and the next. The boardwalk stretched empty ahead of me, and I could see all the way to the end. There was nowhere they could have gone that fast. No buildings, no boats close enough to board. Nothing, but their shadows were still there. 3 dark shapes on the sun-bleached wood, perfectly detailed. I could see the outline of the man's camera, the swing of the woman's ponytail, the slouch of the boy's shoulders. The shadows were crisp and black, as if the people casting them were still standing right there in the brutal clarity of noon sun. I stood frozen for maybe 30 seconds before I started running. My boots hammered against the boards, and I was shouting something. I do not remember what. When I reached the spot where the shadows lay, I stopped so fast I almost fell. The wood beneath those shadows was cold. Not cool, not slightly chilled. Cold like a freezer, cold enough that frost was forming in tiny crystals along the edges of each shadow. I could see my breath. This was June in Alaska, temperatures in the mid-60s, and I was standing in a pocket of winter that extended exactly to the borders of 3 human-shaped shadows and no further. I looked around wildly. There were maybe 20 other people visible along the Spit. Fishermen hauling gear, a couple walking their dog, a family eating lunch at the picnic tables. I started waving my arms, yelling for help, but nobody seemed to hear me. They went about their business as if nothing had happened, as if 3 people had not just ceased to exist 50 feet away from them. A fisherman finally walked over, irritated by my shouting. His name was Dale, a local who ran charters out of the harbor. When he got close enough to see the shadows, his face went slack. "We are looking at shadows," he said. "Just shadows on the wood." "But look at the frost," I said. "Feel the air." He knelt down and reached toward one of the shadows. The moment his fingers crossed into that dark outline, he yanked his hand back with a hiss. His fingertips were white with frostbite. "What in the hell?" he whispered. Within an hour, the boardwalk was crowded. Harbor patrol, local police, eventually state troopers. Everyone had the same reaction. Confusion, then fear, then a desperate need to rationalize what they were seeing. The shadows stayed, perfect and unchanging, even as the sun moved across the sky. That should have been impossible. Shadows shift with the light source. These did not. They remained fixed to those boards like they had been painted there. A photographer from the Homer Tribune took pictures. The shadows showed up on film exactly as they appeared to the naked eye, which ruled out mass hallucination. Someone suggested outlining them with chalk, as if they were crime scene markers. The idea made my skin crawl, but they did it anyway. White lines traced around 3 human shapes that cast no bodies. The cold intensified as the day wore on. By evening, the temperature directly above the shadows had dropped to below freezing. The wood was brittle with ice. Nobody could stand in that spot for more than a few seconds without their teeth chattering and their fingers going numb. The cold rose straight up in a column, maybe 7 feet high, then stopped abruptly. You could hold your hand in warm air and icy air simultaneously, separated by an invisible wall that followed the contour of each shadow perfectly. The families of the missing tourists arrived within 2 days. The man was Gerald Hoffman from Portland. The woman was his daughter, Rebecca. The boy was her son, Tyler. 3 generations taking a cruise ship shore excursion. They had last been seen on security footage at a gift shop 20 minutes before I saw them on the boardwalk. The footage from the boardwalk cameras showed them walking toward the end of the spit, then a burst of static, then empty planks. And shadows. Rebecca's husband stood at the edge of those shadows and wept. He tried to step into his son, his shadow, as if he could follow the boy wherever he had gone, but the cold drove him back. State investigators measured and photographed and collected samples of the frost. They found nothing unusual, just ice crystals, just frozen water vapor. But the vapor kept freezing, day after day, even when the sun beat down and the surrounding boards were almost too hot to touch. The theories started immediately. Alien abduction, government experiment, temporal anomaly, interdimensional portal. Everyone had an explanation, and none of them made sense. The FBI sent agents. They asked questions, took statements, and left looking troubled. No official report was ever released. I stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those 3 people vanishing, saw the empty space where they should have been. I started having nightmares about shadows detaching from bodies and walking away on their own. In the dreams, I would look down and my own shadow would be missing, and I would know that meant I was about to disappear. 3 weeks after the vanishing, I went back to the boardwalk at midnight. I do not know why. Maybe I thought I would see something in the dark that I had missed in daylight. The spit was deserted. Most businesses closed by 9, and there is nothing out there but wind and water after that. The shadows were still there, still perfectly defined, still radiating cold, but in the darkness, they were glowing. A faint phosphorescent blue light outlined each shape, pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. I had not brought a flashlight. The glow from the shadows was bright enough to see by. I knelt next to Gerald Hoffman, the shadow, and looked at the luminescent outline. Up close, I could see details I had missed before. The shadow was not flat. It had depth, texture, the creases in his clothing, the individual strands of hair. It was less like a shadow and more like a perfect 3-dimensional impression pressed into the surface of reality. Then I heard the sound. It came from the shadows themselves. A whisper, or maybe a breath, or maybe something that my brain could only interpret as those things because it had no other reference point. The sound was coming from somewhere far away and very close at the same time. I pressed my ear close to the boards, ignoring the cold that made my skin ache. Voices, dozens of them, hundreds, whispering in languages I did not recognize, speaking over and under and through each other in a cacophony that should have been chaos but somehow formed a pattern. A rhythm, almost like music, if music could be made from fear and longing and desperation. I jerked back and ran. I did not stop running until I reached my truck in the parking lot. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The next morning, I gave my notice at the resort. I told them I had a family emergency in the lower 48. I packed everything I owned into my truck and left Homer before noon. I have not been back, but I have been following the story. The shadows remained on that boardwalk for 17 months. The cold never dissipated. Local businesses complained about the loss of tourism. People were afraid to walk on the spit. The town council finally decided to remove that section of boardwalk entirely. They cut out the affected planks and transported them to a storage facility. The shadows went with them, still frozen, still glowing at night, still whispering. 5 years ago, the storage facility burned down. Electrical fire, according to the report. Everything inside was destroyed. When investigators searched the ruins, they found the section of boardwalk reduced to ash. But they also found 3 shapes burned into the concrete floor beneath where the boards had been. Shadow shapes, outlined in a sooty residue that chemical analysis could not identify. Those marks are still there. The building was never rebuilt. It sits empty now, windows boarded up, surrounded by a chain-link fence. But sometimes at night, people driving past report seeing a blue glow inside. And on very quiet nights, if you stand near the fence, you can hear voices. I think about Gerald and Rebecca and Tyler every day. I wonder where they are, if they are still alive somewhere, trapped in whatever place their shadows touch. I wonder if they can see us the way we can see their shadows. If they are watching and screaming and trying to get back, but the only part of them that can reach our world is that dark impression they left behind. I wonder if it could happen again. If there are other thin places in the world where reality is worn down enough that people can slip through. If anyone could vanish the way they did, in bright daylight, surrounded by witnesses, leaving nothing behind but a shadow and questions that will never be answered. I wonder if I should have stepped into one of those shadows when I had the chance. If maybe that was my only opportunity to find out what happened to them. To help them, if they could be helped. But I did not. I ran. And now I live in Seattle, and I work construction, and I avoid boardwalks. I avoid any place where the light feels wrong or the air is too still. I watch my shadow obsessively, checking to make sure it is still attached, still moving when I move. Because sometimes, just for a second, I think I see it hesitate. I think I see it lag half a step behind me, as if it is considering staying put while I walk away. And in those moments, I feel the same pressure change I felt that day on the Homer spit. The same heaviness in the air, the same sense that something is about to shift in a way that cannot be undone. The official record says 3 tourists went missing in Homer, Alaska in 1999. What it does not say is that they might still be missing right now, in this moment, crying out from wherever they fell through the cracks in the world. What it does not say is that their shadows are still waiting. Story 4. Fog that remembers the ice fog followed me home from Nenana, and now it waits outside my window every night, pressing faces against the glass. I never believed the stories. Grew up in Fairbanks, spent 38 years in Alaska, and thought I had seen every trick the winter could play. Ice fog was just a fact of life up there. When temperatures drop below -40, moisture in the air freezes instantly, creating a thick frozen mist that hangs over everything. Visibility drops to nothing. You learn to live with it, but the fog in Nenana is different. I was passing through on my way back from a job site in January 2019. Construction manager. I had been overseeing a warehouse renovation 50 miles north and was heading home to Fairbanks. It was late, almost midnight, and the temperature had bottomed out at -48. My truck was the only vehicle on the park's highway. The fog rolled in without warning. One second the road was clear, the next I was drowning in white. Thick, impenetrable. My headlights reflected back at me like I was driving through milk. I slowed to a crawl, hunched over the wheel, trying to follow the yellow line. That was when I saw the figure, standing on the shoulder, perfectly still, human-shaped but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, made entirely fog. I could see right through it, but the shape was unmistakable. Head, arms, legs, all formed from frozen mist. I blinked and it was gone, dissolved back into the white. I told myself it was exhaustion, told myself I was seeing things. But then I saw another one, and another, figures made of fog lining both sides of the road. Dozens of them, all facing my truck as I passed. My hands were shaking on the wheel. I pressed the accelerator, trying to get through the fog bank faster. But it followed. No matter how fast I drove, the white wall stayed pressed against my windows. And the figures kept appearing, sometimes far away, sometimes close enough to touch. One of them stepped into the road directly in front of me. I slammed the brakes. The truck fishtail ed on black ice, spinning sideways. I hit something soft. Not a person, just fog, but I felt the impact. Felt resistance, like driving through something solid. The truck came to a stop facing the wrong direction. Engine still running, headlights pointing back the way I came. And in the glow of those lights, I saw them. 50, maybe 100, fog figures standing in the middle of the highway. All perfectly motionless, all staring at me. I threw the truck in reverse and backed up blind until I could turn around. Then I floored it. The engine screamed. The figures watched me go. And as I passed each one, it turned to follow my movement. Heads swiveling in perfect unison, tracking me. I made it to Nenana 10 minutes later. The fog thinned as I entered town. I pulled into a gas station, hands still shaking, and filled up even though my tank was 3/4 full. Just needed an excuse to stop, to breathe, to convince myself I had imagined the whole thing. An old man was pumping gas at the next island. He looked at me and nodded toward the fog still visible at the edge of town. Then he said something I will never forget. He said the fog in Nenana remembers. Said it takes the shape of people who died in the cold. Trappers, prospectors, Native villagers from centuries ago. Anyone who froze to death out on the tundra. The fog absorbs them somehow, keeps their shapes, and on the coldest nights, those shapes come back. He said if the fog followed you, it meant you were marked. Meant something in the mist recognized you, wanted you. I laughed it off, paid for my gas, got back on the road. But I kept checking my mirrors, kept watching for figures in the white. The fog had cleared by the time I reached Fairbanks. I made it home around 2 in the morning, exhausted and rattled. I took a hot shower, drank 2 fingers of whiskey, and collapsed into bed. I woke at dawn to find frost patterns on my bedroom window. Normal in Alaska, except these patterns were shaped like handprints. Dozens of them, pressed against the glass from outside. Small hands, large hands, all perfectly formed in ice crystals. I opened the curtain and looked out. The fog was there, sitting in my front yard like a living thing, dense and low to the ground. And in the fog, I saw shapes, the same figures from the highway, standing perfectly still, watching my house. I called in sick to work, spent the day inside, checking the windows every few minutes. The fog never moved, never dissipated, just sat there, waiting, and the figures multiplied. By noon there were dozens. By evening there were hundreds, all made of frozen mist, all facing my house. When night fell, they moved closer, formed a ring around my property. I could see them clearly now. Men, women, children, all different sizes, all with vague, indistinct features, like photographs that had been left out in the sun too long. Faded, but still recognizable as human. One of them pressed against my living room window, its face flattened against the glass, features smearing. Then it pulled back and the frost on the window had changed. Now it showed a perfect imprint of a face. Eyes, nose, mouth open in a silent scream. I backed away from the window, grabbed my phone and called the police. Told them there were people in my yard. Trespassers. The dispatcher asked me to describe them. I started to explain and then stopped. How do you tell someone that your house is surrounded by figures made of fog? That they are pressing their faces against your windows and leaving frost impressions? The dispatcher must have heard something in my voice because she sent a patrol car anyway. 2 officers showed up 20 minutes later. I watched from the window as they walked through my yard, flashlights cutting through the fog. They did not see anything. Walked right through the figures without noticing them. The fog shapes just parted and reformed. Like smoke, the officers knocked on my door and asked if I was okay. I told them I must have been mistaken. They suggested I get some rest. Said the isolation and cold could play tricks on your mind. Then they left. The fog figures moved even closer after that. Right up against the house, surrounding it completely, and they started making sounds. Not voices exactly, just soft sighs, whispers, the sound of frozen breath. It filled my house, came through the walls, through the floor, through the ceiling. I did not sleep that night. Just sat in my kitchen with all the lights on, listening to the whispers and watching frost patterns spread across every window. The patterns formed images, scenes. A man frozen in a snowbank, a child lost in a blizzard, a woman collapsed on ice, all of them dying alone in the cold. By morning, I knew what the old man at the gas station had meant. The fog did not just remember the dead, it collected them, preserved them, and now it wanted to add me to its collection. I packed a bag and left, drove south toward Anchorage, put as much distance between myself and Nenana as I could. But the fog found me anyway. A week later, it appeared outside my hotel window. The figures were there, waiting, watching. I kept moving, changed locations every few days. But the fog followed. It always found me. And each time it got closer, more insistent, the figures would press against whatever window I was near, leave their frost impressions, show me how they died, show me what they wanted. They wanted company, wanted me to join them in the frozen mist, wanted me to become another shape in the white, another face pressed against a stranger, this window. I am writing this from a motel in Washington State, 3,000 miles from Nenana. But last night, the temperature dropped below freezing, and this morning, there was fog outside, thick and low, and in that fog, I saw shapes, familiar shapes, growing more solid, more real. The fog is learning, adapting, getting stronger, and I think it is almost ready to take me. I can feel it, the cold sinking into my bones, the whispers getting louder inside my head, telling me to stop running, to accept what is coming. Tonight, when the temperature drops again, I think the fog will finally reach through the glass. I think those frozen hands will grab me and pull me in. And tomorrow, someone else will drive through Nenana in the winter darkness. And they will see a new figure in the fog. Tall, thin, standing by the side of the highway. And that figure will be me, forever trapped in the mist, Forever watching, forever waiting for someone else to follow home. Story 5 to 1977 Fairbanks time slip. The photograph shouldn't exist. I found it in my father's attic last month, tucked inside a University of Alaska Fairbanks yearbook from 1977. It shows a young man standing outside the old Nordale Hotel, except the Nordale was demolished in 1959, 18 years before this picture was supposedly taken. The truly impossible part is that the young man in the photo is holding a newspaper clearly showing the date, December 3, 1942. His other hand grips what looks like a modern 1970s Polaroid camera. My father never talked about his college roommate, David Torben, who disappeared in November 1977. Now I understand why. I've spent weeks piecing together what happened from police reports, newspaper clippings, and David's journal, which my father kept hidden for 46 years. What David experienced in Fairbanks that winter makes me question everything I thought I knew about the nature of time itself. David's journal starts normally enough. Engineering student, struggling with calculus, girlfriend problems, typical college stuff. Then comes the entry for November 15, 1977. He described walking to class through the ice fog that blankets Fairbanks in the winter. That thick frozen mist that cuts visibility to nothing. The temperature was 40 below. He wrote that the fog seemed different that morning, crackling with static electricity that made his fillings ache. The campus buildings disappeared in the white. He kept walking straight, knowing the engineering building should be dead ahead. But when the fog cleared, he stood in front of a building he'd never seen before, a 3-story wooden structure with a sign reading, Nordale Hotel. The street was dirt and gravel instead of paved. Model T Fords lined the road. His first thought was that it was some kind of historical reenactment, maybe for Alaska, a statehood anniversary. But the details were too perfect. The smell of coal smoke and horse manure, the sound of a radio playing big band music from an open window, people dressed in 1940s clothing who looked at him like he was insane in his down jacket and Nike sneakers. A newspaper stand confirmed his impossible situation. Every paper showed the date December 3, 1942. World War II headlines dominated the front pages. David wrote that his legs nearly gave out. He stumbled into an alley and vomited, his mind refusing to process what was happening. For 3 days, he explored this older Fairbanks, taking dozens of Polaroid photos with the camera he had in his backpack. He slept in doorways, terrified that interacting with anyone might change history. He watched soldiers from Ladd Field, the military base that would later become Fort Wainwright, drinking in bars that no longer existed in 1977. He saw buildings that had burned down decades before he was born. The strangest part was that the ice fog would return periodically, and when it did, David could sometimes see through it to his own time. Like looking through frosted glass, he glimpsed modern cars, paved roads, the university campus. But he couldn't cross back. Something held him in 1942. Some force he couldn't understand or overcome. On his third night, December 5, 1942, David saw something that changed everything. He watched a man walk out of the ice fog wearing modern clothes, carrying a notebook, looking as confused and terrified as David had been. The man saw David and ran toward him, but before they could speak, something else emerged from the fog. David's journal description still makes my hands shake. He wrote that it wasn't human, wasn't animal, wasn't anything that should exist. It moved like smoke given form, with appendages that weren't quite arms reaching through the air, leaving tears in reality itself. Where it touched, the world glitched, showing multiple time periods simultaneously. A modern streetlight flickered over a hitching post. A biplane landed on a helicopter pad that shouldn't exist yet. The creature, for lack of a better word, grabbed the other man. David heard screaming that seemed to come from multiple throats in multiple decades all at once. The man aged and grew younger simultaneously, his clothes cycling through different eras, his face becoming every age he'd ever been or would be. Then he simply scattered, like someone had thrown his entire timeline into the air like confetti. David ran. He ran through the ice fog, not caring which time period he ended up in, just needing to escape. He felt the thing pursuing him, felt time itself bending around it. Buildings rose and fell like breathing. The sun strobed through days and seconds. His Polaroid camera grew hot in his hands, the photos inside developing and fading and developing again. He stumbled and fell, And when he looked up, he was back in 1977, lying in the snow outside the engineering building. Campus security found him there, hypothermic and ranting about time travel. His camera was partially melted, most of the photos destroyed, but a few survived, showing impossible scenes of 1942 Fairbanks in perfect detail. The police didn't believe him until he described the location of 3 bodies from unsolved murders in the 1940s, details that had never been made public. He knew where they were buried because he'd seen the killer in 1942, had watched him dispose of evidence. The bodies were exactly where David said they did. The university wanted to study him, but David refused. He became paranoid, convinced that the thing from the ice fog could find anyone who slipped through time. He said there were others, dozens maybe, who experienced the same temporal displacement in Fairbanks over the years. The ice fog, combined with the extreme magnetic conditions near the Arctic, created weak points in time itself. His final journal entry, dated November 30th, 1977, is just one line. It found me. It is here. Time isn't what we think it is. David disappeared that night. His dorm room was found in an impossible state. Parts of it belonged to different time periods. A section of wall was made of logs from the 1920s. His desk was from the 1960s. His bed didn't exist yet, wouldn't be manufactured until 1983. In the center of the room, the air itself was wrong, shimmering like heat waves but cold to the touch. My father never entered that room again. The university sealed it, eventually demolishing the entire dormitory in 1981. But I've talked to current students, and they say that on nights when the ice fog is thick, you can still see the building that shouldn't be there, flickering in and out of existence. They found 12 other cases that matched David's experience. Fairbanks residents who claimed to have slipped through time during ice fog events, some going backward, some forward. Most were dismissed as hoaxes or mental illness. But they all described the same entity hunting them afterward, the same creature that existed outside normal time. 3 weeks ago, I experienced it myself. Walking through an ice fog near the university, I heard big band music and smelled coal smoke. For just a moment, I saw the Nordale Hotel where Starbucks should be. I ran, but not before seeing something that stopped my heart. In the second-floor window of that impossible hotel stood David Torben, unchanged since 1977, watching me with eyes that reflected decades of horror. He held up a sign, crudely written, "Dawn, to investigate." Dawn, to look for answers. It spreads through knowledge, but it's too late for that warning, because ever since that night, I've been slipping. I'll be driving and suddenly the road is dirt. I'll wake up in my apartment and the walls are made of lumber that to be cut for 30 years. My reflection sometimes shows me at different ages, sometimes shows someone else entirely. The ice fog is coming again tonight. The Weather Service issued a warning, but they don't understand what they were really forecasting. The fog isn't just frozen moisture. It is frozen time, and something lives inside it, feeding on those who fall between the moments. I can feel it watching me now, waiting. My room is starting to flicker. The lamp on my desk is from 1952, but my laptop shows tomorrow, this news. My hands are aging and growing younger with each keystroke. I am scattered across decades, and I don't know which one will claim me when the fog clears. If you in Fairbanks, if you see the ice fog rolling in, to go out. To investigate the sounds from other eras, and whatever you do, to follow the footprints that lead into times that no longer exist. Because once you slip through, once you see what lives between the seconds, you become part of the fog yourself, trapped forever in Fairbanks' endless winter of broken time. I can see David now, standing in my room, but he is in 1942, 1977, and 2024 simultaneously. He is trying to tell me something, but his words are scattered across decades. All I can make out is one phrase, repeated in every timeline. We're not traveling through time. Time is traveling through us. The fog is here. The walls are breathing years. I am disappearing, and I don't know when I'll land. Story 6. Fort at Devil, as Cove. I never believed in ghosts until I found myself speaking a language I had never learned, begging for mercy in words that belonged to dead men. It started 3 weeks ago when I took a job I should have refused. My name is Marcus Webb, and I work as a salvage diver out of Juneau, Alaska. The pay is decent, the work is hard, and most days I go home with nothing more dramatic than sore muscles and salt water in my lungs. But when a private collector named Dmitry Volkov offered me $15,000 to explore a forgotten cove near Sitka, I ignored every instinct screaming at me to walk away. The locals call it Devil's Cove, though the official maps do not label it at all. Volkov told me there was something valuable hidden in the ruins of an old Russian fort, something that predated the Alaska Purchase of 1867. He showed me photographs of crumbling stone walls strangled by moss and blackberry vines, watchtowers that leaned like broken teeth against the gray Alaskan sky. He said the fort had been a prison once, a place where the Russian Empire sent men who were too dangerous or too valuable to execute outright. Political prisoners, spies, men who knew too many secrets. They lived and died in that remote place, forgotten by history. What Volkov wanted was simple enough. Search the ruins, locate any remaining structures or chambers beneath the fort, and retrieve whatever I found. He was vague about what exactly I was looking for, but he mentioned gold, documents, artifacts from before the American acquisition. I did not ask too many questions. $15,000 buys a lot of silence. I arrived at the cove on a Thursday morning under a sky the color of old bruises. The water was black and still, reflecting nothing. The forest pressed close to the shoreline, dense stands of spruce and hemlock that seemed to absorb sound rather than echo it. I anchored my boat 50 yards offshore and studied the ruins through binoculars. The fort sat on a rocky outcrop that jutted into the cove like a broken finger. Stone walls rose 15 feet in places, though most had collapsed into piles of rubble. I could see the remains of what might have been a gatehouse, and beyond that, the hollow shells of buildings whose roofs had rotted away decades ago. The silence was the first thing I noticed. No birds called from the trees. No seals barked from the rocks. The only sound was the gentle lap of water against my hull, and even that seemed muffled, distant, as though I were hearing it through layers of cotton. I geared up and rowed to shore in my inflatable. The beach was narrow, just a strip of black sand and broken shells that crunched under my boots. I secured the raft and climbed the slope toward the fort, my metal detector slung over one shoulder, my pack heavy with tools and emergency supplies. The air smelled wrong, like wet stone and something else, something organic and spoiled that I could not identify. The gatehouse entrance was still partially intact, a narrow archway choked with dead vines. I had to duck to pass through, and as I did, I felt a sudden drop in temperature, as though I had stepped from summer into winter in the span of a single heartbeat. My breath misted in front of me. I stopped and checked my thermometer. 42 degrees outside, 31 inside the gatehouse. That made no sense. Beyond the arch, I found myself in what had once been a courtyard. The ground was uneven, covered in moss and fallen stones. 3 buildings formed a rough square around the space, their walls still standing but their interiors exposed to the sky. I could see the remains of wooden floors rotted through, iron fixtures corroded into rust. In the center of the courtyard stood something that made my skin crawl. A wooden post, 10 feet tall, blackened with age and carved with symbols I did not recognize. Chains hung from iron rings bolted into the wood, and at the base of the post, the ground was stained a dark brown that looked too much like old blood. I turned on my metal detector and began a systematic sweep of the courtyard. The device crackled and popped with interference, the needle jumping erratically even though I was nowhere near metal. I adjusted the settings, but nothing helped. The detector was useless here, responding to something in the ground or the air that I could not measure. I decided to search the buildings manually. The first structure was a barracks, long and narrow, with rows of stone sleeping platforms built into the walls. Personal items still littered the floor, rusted tin cups, rotted leather boots, the broken handle of a knife. I found a tin plate with Cyrillic letters stamped into the rim and slipped it into my pack. Volkov would want to see that. The second building was harder to identify. It might have been a chapel or a meeting hall. The walls were covered in faded murals, religious icons painted in the Orthodox style, their faces worn away by time and weather. But someone had defaced them, scratching crude symbols over the painted figures, words in a script I did not recognize. The floor here was different, made of fitted stones rather than bare earth. I knelt and brushed away the moss, revealing more of those strange symbols carved directly into the rock. That was when I heard the voice. It came from somewhere behind me, A low murmur that might have been words or might have been the wind moving through broken walls. I spun around, my flashlight cutting through the gloom. The room was empty, but the sound continued, rising and falling, a rhythmic cadence that reminded me of prayer or chanting. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I was alone in this place. I had to be alone. I left the building and crossed to the third structure, the largest of the three. This one still had part of its roof intact, a sagging span of blackened timbers that looked ready to collapse at any moment. The entrance was partially blocked by rubble, but I managed to squeeze through into a space that had once been a commandant's office or administrative center. A heavy wooden desk sat against one wall, its surface warped and split. Shelves lined the other walls, most of them collapsed, but a few still held the remains of books and ledgers, their pages swollen and illegible. I searched the desk drawers and found nothing but rusted nails and mouse droppings. But when I moved the desk away from the wall, I discovered something that made my pulse quicken. A section of the floor behind the desk was different from the rest. Newer wood, though still old, maybe 100 years rather than 150. Someone had built a trapdoor here, disguised it, and then left it to be forgotten. I used my pry bar to lever up the boards. They came away with a shower of splinters and the smell of earth and decay. Below was a shaft, maybe 6 feet deep, with an iron ladder bolted to one side. At the bottom I could see the opening to a tunnel, man-made, shored up with timbers that had somehow resisted the rot that claimed everything else. I should have left then. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get back in my boat and leave this place behind. But $15,000 is a lot of money, and I had already come this far. I lowered myself into the shaft. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for my shoulders, and the ceiling was low enough that I had to crouch. I moved forward slowly, my flashlight beam showing rough stone walls and a floor of packed earth. The air was stale and cold, and with every step, the temperature seemed to drop another degree. My breath came in thick clouds now, and I could feel the chill seeping through my jacket and into my bones. The tunnel opened into a chamber about 20 feet across and 8 feet high. The walls here were different, cut with precision and decorated with more of those strange symbols. But what dominated the room was what stood in its center. A wooden chest, maybe 4 feet long and 2 feet deep, bound with iron straps and sealed with a lock that had long since rusted into uselessness. I approached it slowly, every nerve in my body alive with a fear I could not explain. The chest was heavy, but I managed to drag it toward the tunnel entrance. As I did, I noticed something carved into the stone floor around where the chest had sat. A circle, with symbols arranged in a pattern that looked almost like writing. And at 12 points around the circle, small hollows had been carved into the stone, each one stained the same dark brown I had seen in the courtyard above. I got the chest back to the surface and into the courtyard before I opened it. My hands were shaking as I broke the lock with my pry bar and lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in rotted cloth, were dozens of items. Gold coins, Orthodox crosses studded with gems, ornate daggers with jeweled handles. There were also papers, documents written in Russian in a spidery hand that I could not read. And at the very bottom of the chest, wrapped separately in what might have once been silk, was a small wooden box, plain and unadorned except for a symbol burned into its lid. I opened the box. Inside was a single object, a key made of black iron, about 6 inches long, with an elaborate head carved in the shape of a skull. The moment my fingers touched it, the world changed. The temperature plummeted. My breath stopped misting and instead crystallized in the air, tiny ice particles that hung suspended like frozen stars. And then I heard them. Voices, dozens of voices, all around me, speaking in Russian. I understood every word, though I had never studied the language, never heard it spoken except in movies. They were screaming, begging, cursing. The voices overlapped and echoed until they became a single wave of sound that threatened to crush my mind. I dropped the key and staggered backward, but the voices did not stop. And then I saw them. Men. Translucent and flickering like bad projections, filling the courtyard. They wore the rough clothes of prisoners, their faces gaunt with starvation, their eyes hollow with suffering. They moved toward me, their mouths open in silent screams, their hands reaching. I ran. I do not remember leaving the fort or getting back to my boat. I only remember the voices in my head, the words I should not know, the pleas of men who had died more than a century ago. I remember starting the engine and pointing my bow toward open water, and I remember looking back at the ruins and seeing them there, standing at the shoreline, watching me go. That was 3 weeks ago. I made it back to Juneau and locked myself in my apartment. I thought distance would help. That leaving Devil's Cove would break whatever hold that place had on me. But I was wrong. Every night I dream in Russian. I see their faces. I know their names and their crimes, their hopes and their deaths. Dmitry Volkov has called me 17 times. I have not answered. I do not know what I would say to him, how I could explain what I found or what found me. But the worst part, the thing that keeps me awake every night, is the knowledge that I brought something back with me. Not the chest or the gold or the documents. Something else. When I look in the mirror now, I sometimes see shadows standing behind me, men in prison rags who watch with dead eyes. And I hear them whispering, always whispering, in a language that is becoming more familiar than English. 2 days ago, I started speaking Russian in my sleep. Yesterday, I caught myself writing in Cyrillic characters, filling page after page with words I do not remember writing but that I can now read perfectly. They are confessions, the last words of dying men, the secrets they whispered to stone walls and empty air in the months before they died in that forgotten place. The key is still in my pack. I cannot bring myself to throw it away, though I know I should, because I understand now what it opens. Not a door or a lock, but a boundary, a barrier that was meant to keep the dead where they belong. The Russians who built that fort did not just imprison criminals. They imprisoned something else, something that fed on suffering and death, something that was supposed to stay buried beneath Devil's Cove until the end of time. I broke that prison. I let them out. And now they are here with me, inside my mind, inside my skin, waiting for the moment when I am weak enough that they can push me out entirely and take my body for themselves. Last night I woke up standing in my kitchen with a knife in my hand, speaking in a voice that was not mine, using words I understood but had never learned. I was begging someone named Dmitry, but not Volkov, a different Dmitry, an officer who served at the fort in 1853, asking him for mercy, for food, for death. Anything but another day in that place. I do not know how much longer I can hold on. The voices are getting louder, the shadows are getting clearer, and every time I close my eyes, I am back in that courtyard, standing among the ghosts, feeling the cold that has nothing to do with weather and everything to do with the absolute absence of life. If you ever find yourself near Sitka, stay away from the nameless cove where the old fort stands. The gold is real, so are the ghosts, and they are always hungry for someone new to speak through, someone new to wear, someone new to use as a bridge between their world and ours. I thought I was a salvage diver, recovering lost treasure from forgotten places. But I was wrong. I was not the diver. I was the salvage, and something very old, very angry, and very patient has finally pulled me up from the depths. Story 7. Aurora Eater. I stopped believing in God the night the sky tried to eat me. That is not metaphor. That is not some poetic way of saying I had a bad trip or a mental breakdown in the Alaskan wilderness. I mean, something in the sky, something that wore the northern lights like camouflage, actually tried to consume me. And I watched it succeed with someone else first. My name is Marcus Webb. I am a wildlife photographer from Portland. And 3 months ago, I drove 12 hours into the interior of Alaska chasing a story that doesn't exist anymore. Not because it wasn't true, but because I'm probably the only person left who remembers it happened. The assignment seemed simple enough. A small outdoor magazine wanted coverage of the winter wildlife migration patterns near Coldfoot, a town so remote that calling it a town feels generous. Population fluctuates between 10 and 30 depending on the season. I'd been there once before, 5 years earlier, and remembered it as the kind of place where silence has weight, where you can hear your own heartbeat in the gaps between wind gusts. I arrived on a Tuesday in late January. The sun barely crested the horizon anymore, giving us maybe 3 hours of weak, gray daylight before the darkness returned. Most photographers would call these conditions impossible. I call them perfect. There is something about Arctic winter that strips away all the comfortable lies we tell ourselves about being apex predators. Up there, in that cold, you remember what it feels like to be prey. The lodge where I stayed was run by a man named Dale Hutchins, 72 years old, with hands like gnarled tree roots and eyes that seemed to look past you rather than at you. He'd been in Alaska for 47 years, he told me, and had no intention of ever leaving. Said the lower 48 had gotten too crowded, too loud, too fake. I understood what he meant. On my second night, Dale asked me if I planned to shoot the aurora. I told him that wasn't really my focus, but sure, if the conditions were right. That is when his expression changed. Not dramatically, just a slight tightening around his mouth, a barely perceptible shift in his posture. He asked me if I knew the old trapper legends. I told him I'd heard a few. The standard frontier mythology, Wendigo stories, tales about miners who went mad from isolation. He shook his head slowly, and for the first time since I met him, Dale looked directly at me, holding my gaze in a way that made my skin prickle. He told me about the Aurora Eater. According to the old trappers, the ones who worked these territories back in the 1800s, there was something that lived in the upper atmosphere. Something that had been there long before humans arrived, possibly before anything we recognize as life existed on Earth. It was a predator, but not in any biological sense do you understand? It didn't hunt for food or territory or reproduction. It hunted because that is what it was, the same way a black hole consumes light. Pure function without purpose. The trappers called it the Aurora Eater because it hid within the northern lights, using that natural phenomenon as camouflage, the way an anglerfish uses a luminescent lure. When the aurora was at its most intense, when the sky rippled with curtains of green and purple and blue, that is when it fed. It would descend from the ionosphere as a section of the aurora itself, indistinguishable from the natural display. And anyone caught in its light simply ceased to exist. Not died, not killed, erased. The only trace left behind was a silhouette, a human-shaped patch of frozen ground where the person had been standing, as if their body had somehow absorbed all the heat from the earth beneath them before vanishing. Dale told me 17 people had disappeared this way over the past century and a half. 17 documented cases where search parties found these frozen silhouettes and nothing else. No tracks leading away, no blood, no evidence of animal predation or human violence. Just an empty outline and testimony from witnesses who had been far enough from the descended aurora to avoid its effect. I smiled politely and thanked him for the story. Dale didn't smile back. He told me to be careful if I went out during an aurora event. Told me to watch the lights closely, and if any section seemed to move independently from the rest, if any curtain appeared to descend toward the ground, I should run and not look back. I nodded, filed the story away as colorful local folklore, and spent the next 3 days photographing caribou and Arctic foxes in the weak winter daylight. The work was good. The isolation was exactly what I needed after a messy divorce and a year of feeling disconnected from everything that used to matter. Out there, with just my camera and the wilderness, I felt something close to peace. The aurora arrived on Friday night. I'd seen the northern lights before, but never like this. The sky ignited around 9 p.m., transforming from black to a rippling ocean of green and purple that seemed close enough to touch. Curtains of light danced and swirled in patterns that almost looked choreographed, too organized to be random atmospheric phenomena. I grabbed my camera and tripod and headed out, unable to resist documenting something this spectacular. Dale was in the lodge, his common room, when I came downstairs. He saw my gear and asked where I was going. When I told him, he stood up quickly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. He told me not to go, told me the aurora was too active, too intense. This was exactly the kind of event the old trappers warned about. I thanked him for his concern but explained this was literally my job. I was a professional. I knew how to handle extreme conditions. He was quiet for a long moment, then reached into his pocket and handed me a small compass. Not a modern digital one, but an old brass compass that looked like it belonged in a museum. He told me to keep it with me, to check it regularly. If the needle started spinning wildly or pointing straight up instead of north, I needed to get inside immediately. I pocketed the compass to be polite and headed out into the night. The temperature was negative 23 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough that my breath crystallized instantly, that my exposed skin began to ache within seconds. I was dressed properly, layers of thermal clothing and a parka rated for extreme Arctic conditions, but the cold still found ways to seep in. It always does up there. I hiked about half a mile from the lodge to a small clearing I scouted earlier in the week. Perfect vantage point, no light pollution, 360 views of the sky. I set up my tripod and started shooting long exposures that captured the aurora, this movement as flowing ribbons of color. For the first hour, everything was normal, beautiful, surreal, but normal. The aurora danced and shifted according to the solar winds that created it, following patterns that seemed random but were governed by magnetic fields and atmospheric chemistry. I took hundreds of shots, adjusting exposure times and angles, losing myself in the technical precision of the work. That's when I noticed I wasn't alone. There was someone else in the clearing, maybe 50 yards away. I couldn't make out details at first, just a dark silhouette standing motionless, facing the sky. I called out, my voice muffled and strange in the cold air. No response. I called again, louder this time. Still nothing. I grabbed my flashlight and started walking toward the figure, assuming it was another guest from the lodge or maybe a local who had come out to watch the aurora. As I got closer, I could see it was a man, tall and lean, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned fur parka. He stood perfectly still, arms at his sides, head tilted back at an uncomfortable angle. I was about 20 feet away when I noticed the aurora directly above him was behaving strangely. The rest of the sky was still rippling normally, waves of green and purple flowing in their usual patterns. But above this man, a section of the aurora had separated from the main display. It hung there like a curtain, a vertical sheet of light that pulsed with colors I couldn't quite name. Not green or purple or blue, but something in between, something that hurt to look at directly. And it was descending, slowly, almost imperceptibly. This curtain of light was lowering itself toward the man standing beneath it. I stopped walking. Every instinct I had was suddenly screaming at me that something was wrong, that I was witnessing something I shouldn't be seeing. I yelled at him to move, to get out from under that light. My voice seemed to disappear into the night, absorbed by the snow and the cold and the absolute silence that had fallen over the clearing. The man didn't move, didn't react, just stood there with his head tilted back, watching the aurora descend toward him. The light touched his head first. I don't know how else to describe what happened next. The man didn't dissolve or burn or disappear in some flash of energy. He simply stopped being there. Starting from where the light made contact and spreading downward, he ceased to exist. Not quickly, slowly, methodically, like watching an image being erased from the bottom of a photograph upward. By the time the aurora curtain reached the ground, the man was gone. Completely. I ran forward, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. Where he'd been standing, there was a silhouette. The snow and frozen ground had been somehow bleached or burned or frozen in the exact shape of his body. It was perfectly defined, showing the outline of his parka, his boots, even the texture of his fur-trimmed hood. I reached out to touch it, and the ground within the silhouette was so cold it burned my glove. Not regular Arctic cold, something else, something that made the negative 23-degree air feel warm by comparison. Above me, the aurora curtain had retracted back into the main display. The sky looked normal again, as if nothing had happened. I stood there for what might have been seconds or hours, my mind refusing to process what I just witnessed. Then I remembered the compass. I pulled it from my pocket with shaking hands and looked at the needle. It was spinning, not pointing north or south or any direction, just spinning in fast, tight circles like it was caught in some localized magnetic storm. Then it stopped. The needle locked into position, pointing straight up at the sky. I looked up. Directly above me, maybe 100 feet up, a section of the aurora was separating from the main display. Another curtain, another sheet of that wrong-colored light, and it was starting to descend. I ran. I didn't think about my camera or my tripod or the thousands of dollars of equipment I was leaving behind. I just ran, my boots pounding against the frozen ground, my breath coming in ragged gasps that burned my throat and lungs. Behind me, I could feel it. Not see it, feel it. A presence descending, a weight in the air that had nothing to do with atmospheric pressure. I ran until my legs gave out, until I collapsed in the snow about 200 yards from the clearing. When I finally looked back, the aurora curtain had retracted again. The sky was rippling normally, as if nothing had happened. But in the clearing, there were now two silhouettes. Two frozen outlines where human beings had been standing moments before. I made it back to the lodge somehow. Dale took one look at my face and knew. He didn't ask questions, just sat me down by the fire, poured me something that burned going down, and waited until I could speak. I told him everything, every detail. He listened without interrupting, his expression never changing. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he told me I was the 18th person to witness the aurora eater and survive. He'd been the 17th, back in 1994. That's why he never left Alaska. He was watching, documenting, trying to understand something that defied understanding. He showed me a journal, leather-bound and water-stained, filled with entries dating back to the 1850s. Different handwriting styles, different languages even, but all describing the same phenomenon. The aurora that descended, the people who disappeared, the frozen silhouettes left behind. According to the journal, the aurora eater wasn't consistent. Sometimes decades would pass between events. Sometimes multiple incidents would occur within days. There was no pattern anyone had been able to identify. No way to predict when it would feed again. I asked him what it wanted, why it did this. Dale looked at me with those eyes that seemed to see past the surface of things, and he told me that was the wrong question. The aurora eater didn't want anything. It wasn't the creature with motivations or desires. It was more fundamental than that. It was a process, a function. Like entropy or decay, it existed to erase, the same way black holes existed to consume light, the same way time existed to move forward. Asking why it hunted was like asking why gravity pulled things down. It just did. That was its nature. I stayed in Alaska for 2 more weeks. I couldn't leave. Some part of me needed to understand, needed to document what I seen. Dale showed me the locations of the other silhouettes. Most had been destroyed by weather or wildlife over the years, but 3 remained visible, frozen patches of ground that stayed cold no matter the season. As if they were somehow connected to that wrongness I felt when I touched the first one. I photographed them, measured them, took samples of the frozen earth. None of it explained anything. The soil showed no chemical abnormalities, no radiation, no magnetic anomalies except during active aurora events. The silhouettes were just impossibly cold patches of ground shaped like people who no longer existed. On my last night, the aurora returned. Weaker this time, normal, just a natural atmospheric phenomenon, beautiful and harmless. Dale and I stood outside and watched it in silence. He asked me what I was going to do with what I learned. I told him I didn't know. Who would believe me? What good would telling this story do? He nodded slowly and said that was the right answer. Some truths weren't meant to be shared. Some knowledge didn't make the world better or safer. It just made you carry something heavy that you couldn't put down. I left Alaska the next morning, drove 12 hours back to Anchorage, flew home to Portland, and tried to return to normal life. It didn't work. Nothing felt real anymore. Everything seemed temporary and fragile and meaningless compared to what I witnessed. I kept Dale's compass. I check it every night when I see the northern lights on the news, even though they were never visible this far south. Just checking, just making sure the needle still points north, still follows the rules of normal physics. 3 weeks ago, Dale died. Heart attack in his sleep. Peaceful, according to the notification I received from the lodge as new owner. I flew back to Alaska for a funeral that had 4 attendees, including myself. They gave me his journal, the leather-bound record of 18 encounters with the aurora eater over 170 years. The keeper of the story now, the witness who survived, the person responsible for adding entry number 18 and waiting to see if there will be a 19th. I think about the man I saw erased. I think about him constantly. Who was he? Why was he out there alone? Did he know what was about to happen? Or was he just an unlucky person who happened to be in the wrong place when the aurora descended? I think about the silhouettes, frozen shadows of people who don't exist anymore. Not dead, not gone to some afterlife or next stage of existence. Just erased, removed from reality so completely that even searching for their names in records turns up nothing. Dale confirmed it. He tried to identify some of the victims. Birth certificates that should have existed weren't there. Family members who should have remembered them didn't. It wasn't just their bodies that were erased. It was their entire existence. That is what I can stop thinking about. That is what wakes me up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat. The aurora eater doesn't just kill you. It removes you from having ever existed at all. And if that is true, how many people have been erased that we don't even know about? How many empty spaces are there in our history where people should be but aren't? Sometimes I wonder if I am next. If the aurora eater marked me somehow that night when it descended toward me. If I, living on borrowed time, waiting for the day when it finds me again and finishes what it started. Other times I wonder if I'm already gone. If I, just the memory of someone who was erased, echoing through a reality that doesn't include me anymore. Maybe that is why everything feels unreal now. Maybe that This is why I can't connect to anything the way I used to. The journal is hidden in my closet. I added my entry, documented everything I saw with the same clinical precision as the 17 entries before mine. Someday, maybe years from now, maybe tomorrow, someone will find it and read these accounts. Maybe they'll believe. Maybe they'll add entry number 19. I check the compass every night. Watch the needle point north with mechanical reliability. And I wait, because somewhere in the upper atmosphere, hidden within the magnetic fields and solar winds that create the northern lights, something is waiting too. Not thinking, not planning, just existing, just being what it is. A function without purpose, a predator without hunger, the thing that wears the aurora like camouflage and erases people from existence. The aurora eater. And it's still feeding. Story 8. Voices in the ice. The last thing my brother said before he went under was that the singing was beautiful, and he wanted to get closer to hear it better. That was 6 days ago, and I am the only one who made it back from LeConte Bay. My name is Ryan Kozlowski. I am 42 years old, and I work as a software engineer in Seattle. 2 weeks ago, I took time off to go kayaking in Alaska with my younger brother Matt and 2 of his friends from college, Derek and Amanda. It was supposed to be an adventure, one of those trips you take to prove you are still young enough to do something hard and beautiful and real. Instead, it became something I cannot explain to the Coast Guard, the Alaska State Troopers, or the search and rescue teams who keep asking me what happened out there. I keep telling them the truth, but nobody believes me. How could they? I barely believe it myself, and I was there. I saw what lives in that water. I heard what sings from inside the ice. We launched from Petersburg on a Wednesday morning under clear skies. The plan was simple: paddle through Frederick Sound, camp on the mainland, then spend 2 days exploring LeConte Bay, which is famous for having the southernmost tidewater glacier in North America. The bay is remote, cold, and filled with icebergs that calve off the glacier and drift through the dark water like frozen cathedrals. It is the kind of place that makes you feel small and grateful just to be alive. The first day was perfect. We paddled 12 miles through calm water, saw humpback whales breaching in the distance, and made camp on a rocky beach with a view of the sunset over the mountains. Matt grilled salmon on a portable stove while Derek and Amanda argued good-naturedly about the best route into the bay. I remember thinking how lucky we were, how this was exactly the kind of reset I needed from months of staring at computer screens in climate-controlled offices. The next morning, we entered LeConte Bay. The change was immediate and unsettling. The water turned from blue-green to a milky gray-white, clouded with glacial silt. The temperature dropped 20 degrees. Icebergs appeared around us, some no bigger than cars, others the size of houses, their sides glowing an impossible electric blue where the compressed ice caught the light. The air smelled clean and empty, like nothing human had ever touched this place. And that is when we first heard the singing. It started so quietly that I thought I was imagining it. A low hum, almost below the threshold of hearing, that seemed to vibrate through the water and up through the hull of my kayak. I stopped paddling and looked at the others. Matt had stopped too, his head tilted, listening. Derek and Amanda were 50 yards ahead, still moving, apparently unaware. The hum grew louder, resolving into something that sounded almost like voices. Not words exactly, but the kind of wordless melody you might hear in a church, multiple voices singing in harmony, rising and falling in waves. It was beautiful in a way that made my chest ache, the kind of beauty that feels too big for your body to contain. Matt turned his kayak toward me, his eyes wide with wonder. He shouted something about how incredible it was, how it must be the ice making sounds as it melted or shifted. I nodded, but something felt wrong. The singing was too organized, too deliberate. Ice does not harmonize with itself. Ice does not hit notes that sound specifically designed to pull you closer. We paddled deeper into the bay, following the sound. Derek and Amanda heard it now too, and we all moved together through the maze of icebergs, drawn like metal filings to a magnet. The singing grew louder with each stroke, and I could make out individual voices now, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all singing the same melody in perfect unison. The first face appeared just after noon. I was paddling alongside a particularly large iceberg, maybe 30 feet tall and twice as long, when I happened to look down into the water. The visibility was poor because of the glacial silt, but about 10 feet down I could see something pale and round pressed against the underside of the ice. At first I thought it was a seal or maybe a piece of ice that had broken off and was floating suspended in the current. Then it moved. The pale thing rotated slowly, and I saw that it was a face, A human face, pressed against the ice, eyes open and staring up at me, mouth moving in time with the singing that filled the air. I jerked my paddle so hard that I nearly capsized. I shouted for Matt, but when I looked back down, the face was gone. Just cloudy water and the blue glow of ice. I convinced myself I had imagined it. Too much sun on the water, maybe mild hypothermia affecting my judgment. I did not say anything to the others. We paddled for another hour, and the singing never stopped. It just kept going, that same beautiful melody, always seeming to come from just ahead of us, just around the next iceberg. We made camp that night on a narrow gravel beach at the head of the bay. The glacier loomed above us, a wall of dirty white ice stretching half a mile across and rising 200 feet above the waterline. Every few minutes, we heard the crack and boom of ice calving off and crashing into the bay. The singing had faded as we got closer to shore, but I could still hear it faintly, like someone had left a radio on in another room. Amanda was the first one to suggest something was off. She had been a marine biology major before switching to environmental science, and she kept saying that the acoustics in the bay did not make sense. Sound should echo off the ice in the mountains, should bounce around and become distorted. But the singing never echoed. It just existed, pure and clear, coming from everywhere and nowhere. Derek laughed it off and said we were overthinking it. Matt agreed. I said nothing. I could not stop thinking about the face I had seen in the water. The way its mouth had moved, perfectly synchronized with the melody. That night, I woke to the sound of splashing. I unzipped my tent and stepped out into air so cold it hurt to breathe. The moon was bright enough that I did not need my flashlight. At first, I did not see anything unusual. Just the beach. Our kayaks pulled up above the tide line, the black water of the bay reflecting the stars. Then I saw Matt. He was standing at the water, this edge, still in his sleeping bag, shuffling toward the waves like a sleepwalker. I ran to him, grabbed his shoulders, and shook him. He did not wake up. His eyes were open but unfocused, and his lips were moving. He was singing, the same melody we had heard all day, note for note, his voice blending with the voices that drifted across the water. I dragged him back to his tent and zipped him inside. He collapsed immediately and started snoring. In the morning, he had no memory of it. We should have left then. That was our chance. But Derek wanted to explore the north arm of the bay, where the icebergs were densest, and Amanda wanted samples of the glacial water for a project she was working on. Matt seemed fine, fully awake and joking about how he must have been dreaming about being in a choir. I kept my mouth shut and told myself it was just sleepwalking, nothing more sinister than that. We launched after breakfast and paddled north. The icebergs pressed closer here, forming channels barely wide enough for our kayaks. The water was so cold that spray from my paddle made my hands ache. The singing started again almost immediately, louder than before, so loud that it seemed to fill my skull and vibrate in my teeth. And then I saw them, dozens of faces, maybe more, all pressed against the undersides of the icebergs, all staring up at us, pale and bloated, with long hair that drifted in the current. Their mouths moved in perfect synchronization, singing that horrible, beautiful song. I screamed for the others to look. Amanda saw them first and went silent, her paddle frozen in mid-stroke. Derek started swearing, back-paddling frantically, but Matt just sat in his kayak, staring down into the water with an expression of pure rapture on his face. The singing changed. It grew urgent, almost demanding, and I felt a pull in my chest, a physical sensation like someone had hooked a line to my sternum and was reeling me in. Matt started paddling toward the nearest iceberg. I yelled at him to stop, but he ignored me. He reached the ice and placed both hands on it, and the faces in the water all turned toward him at once. That is when I saw the hands, white and waterlogged, reaching up from the depths, dozens of them, breaking the surface and grabbing at the sides of Matt's kayak. He should have been terrified. He should have been paddling away as fast as he could. Instead, he smiled and started to climb out of his boat. I rammed my kayak into his, knocking him sideways. He fell into the water with a splash that seemed too loud, too final. I grabbed his life jacket and hauled him back to the surface. His eyes were distant and dreamy, and he was still humming that melody even as he choked on glacial water. Derek and Amanda helped me get Matt back into his boat. The hands had vanished, the faces were gone, but the singing continued, rising to a crescendo that made my ears ring. We paddled as hard as we could toward open water. Behind us, I heard a sound like ice cracking, but when I looked back, I saw something rising from the bay. Not an iceberg, something else. A shape made of fog and water and pale light. Roughly human but wrong in proportions, with too many limbs and a head that was more skull than face. It sang with the voices of everyone who had ever drowned in that bay, and I understood then what we had stumbled into. The glacier was not just ice. It was a tomb. People had been dying in LeConte Bay for thousands of years. Native hunters who fell through thin ice. Explorers who underestimated the cold. Tourists whose kayaks capsized in rough water. The bay kept them, preserved them, turned them into something that was no longer quite human. And now they sang to draw others down to join them. We made it to the mouth of the bay as the sun was setting. Matt was shivering uncontrollably despite the dry suit and emergency blankets we had wrapped around him. He kept trying to turn his kayak around, kept saying he needed to go back, that the song was not finished yet. We tied his kayak to Derek and towed him. That night, we camped on an island 10 miles from the bay. Matt disappeared while I was asleep. I found his empty sleeping bag at dawn, drag marks leading to the water, and his kayak gone. The Coast Guard found his boat 3 days later, drifting empty near the entrance to LeConte Bay. They are still searching for his body. They will never find it. I know where he is. He is down there with the others, pressed against the underside of the ice, singing. I can still hear it sometimes, late at night when everything is quiet. That same melody, faint but unmistakable, coming from nowhere and everywhere. And I wonder if Matt can hear me, if some part of him is still in there, still aware, still singing. The Coast Guard thinks he drowned in an accident. Derek and Amanda have not spoken to me since we got back. They think I am crazy, that grief has broken something in my mind. Maybe they are right. Maybe I imagined all of it. But I know what I saw in that water. I know what lives in the ice. And I know that LeConte Bay is still singing, still calling, still waiting for the next person to paddle too close and listen too long. The voices never stop. They just grow quieter with distance, but they never truly go away. Story 9. Thing in the photographs, I have not seen the sun in 43 days. And I am starting to understand why my neighbor killed his family. My name is David Brennan. I am 39 years old, originally from Phoenix, Arizona. 6 months ago, I took a contract job as an electrician in Utqiagvik, Alaska, the northernmost town in America. The pay was triple what I made back home, and I figured I could handle a year of cold and darkness if it meant paying off my debts and starting fresh. What I did not know, what nobody told me, was that the darkness here is not like darkness anywhere else. It is not just the absence of light. It is something heavier, something that presses against your windows and seeps under your doors and gets inside your head. The polar night started on November 18th. That was the last time I saw the sun dip below the horizon and fail to come back up. For the next 65 days, Utqiagvik would exist in a twilight that never quite became day. The locals call it the long night. They have lived with it for generations, built their lives around it, learned to survive it. But for people like me, outsiders who come north for work and money, the darkness does something different. It finds the cracks in your mind and widens them. My neighbor, his name was Thomas Whitmore. He lived 3 houses down from me in a small prefab home identical to mine, part of a row of worker housing on the edge of town. Thomas had been here for 2 years, working at the power plant. He had a wife and 2 kids, 7 and 9 years old. I had seen them around, waved hello a few times, the kind of casual neighborly interaction you have with people you do not really know. On January 4th, Thomas stopped coming to work. His supervisor called his house. No answer. The police went to check on him. What they found inside made the news as far south as Anchorage. Thomas had boarded up every window in his house from the inside, layering plywood and blankets and duct tape until no light could get in or out. He had taken every photograph in the house, family portraits, vacation snapshots, pictures of his kids at school, and covered them with drawings. The same figure in every image, drawn in pencil over the faces of his wife and children. A tall shape with no features, just a blank darkness where a face should be. They found Thomas sitting in his living room surrounded by the photographs, rocking back and forth, whispering that it was in the pictures now, that it had replaced everyone, that he was the only real person left. His wife and kids were not in the house. The police are still looking for them. Thomas is in a psychiatric facility in Fairbanks, and he has not spoken a coherent sentence since they took him away. Everyone in town talked about it for a week. Cabin fever, they said. Polar night psychosis. It happens sometimes to people who are not prepared for the darkness. The human brain needs sunlight, needs the rhythm of day and night. Take that away for long enough, and some people just break. I believed that explanation. It made sense. It was rational. But then I started noticing the photographs in my own house. I live alone, which in retrospect was probably a mistake. The company provided the housing, and I had not thought to ask for a roommate. My place is small, just a bedroom, bathroom, kitchen, and living area. I had brought a few personal items from Arizona to make it feel less temporary. Photographs mostly, pictures of my parents, my sister and her kids, my ex-girlfriend from before everything fell apart. I had them on the walls, on the bookshelf, stuck to the refrigerator with magnets. 3 days after they found Thomas, I noticed something odd about one of the photos. It was a picture of my parents taken at my sister's wedding 2 years ago. Both of them smiling, my dad, his arm around my mom, his shoulders. Except when I looked at it on my way to make coffee, I could swear there was someone else in the background. A dark shape standing behind the champagne table, tall and thin and wrong. I took the photo off the wall and held it under the kitchen light. There was nothing there, just my parents in the reception hall and the decorations. I told myself I was seeing things, that I needed more sleep, maybe some vitamin D supplements. But the next morning, the shape was clearer, still in the background, but closer now, as if it had moved forward between the tables. And it was in another photograph too, the one of my sister, his kids at the Grand Canyon. A dark figure standing at the edge of the frame, barely visible against the red rocks. I checked every photograph in my house. The shape was in 7 of them, always in the background, always slightly out of focus, always watching. I threw them away, all of them. I took every photograph I owned, stuffed them in a garbage bag, and drove to the dump at the edge of town. It was 2 in the afternoon, but the sky was the color of bruised plums, that weird twilight that passes for day during the polar night. The temperature was 30 below zero. My breath crystallized in the air as I threw the bag into the dumpster. When I got home, new photographs were on my walls. Not the same ones, different pictures. Ones I had never seen before. Images of places I had never been. People I had never met. A family having a picnic in a park. A man standing in front of a hardware store. A woman holding a baby. And in every single photograph, in the background or the foreground or standing right next to the subjects, was that same dark figure. I tore them down and searched my house. I have no idea where they came from. The doors were locked, the windows secure. I was alone. I had been alone since I threw the original photos away. That night, I could not sleep. I sat in my living room with all the lights on, watching the walls, waiting for something to happen. At 3 in the morning, I heard scratching coming from the bedroom. Soft at first, then louder, like fingernails on paper. I found more photographs scattered across my bed. Dozens of them, covering the blankets. More strangers, more places I did not recognize. And in every image, the figure was closer, not in the background anymore, standing right next to people, touching their shoulders. In one photo, the figure's hand was covering a child's face. I grabbed my phone and started taking pictures of my empty room, thinking I could document this, prove I was not losing my mind. But when I looked at the photos on my phone, the screen, the figure was there too, standing in the corner of my bedroom, watching me through the camera. I ran outside in my socks and pajamas. The cold hit me like a fist, but I did not care. I needed to be away from that house, away from those photographs. The street was empty. Every house was dark except for the faint glow of windows covered in heavy curtains. The sky was black and starless, and the wind carried voices that might have been the howling of the storm or might have been something else. I walked to the community center, the only building with lights on and people inside. A dozen locals sat around playing cards and drinking coffee. I must have looked insane, showing up half frozen and babbling about photographs and dark figures. They gave me a blanket and hot coffee and told me what I already knew. The darkness does things to people, makes them see things that are not there. I needed to get some rest, maybe talk to someone, maybe book a flight south for a few weeks until the sun came back. But one of the old-timers, a man named Joseph who had lived in Utqiagvik his entire life, pulled me aside as I was leaving. He told me his grandfather used to talk about something that came during the long night. Not every year, but sometimes when the darkness was particularly deep and the ice particularly thick. A thing that existed only in the spaces people looked at but did not really see. Photographs, mirrors, reflections. It would appear in the background first, always watching, always waiting. And then it would get closer. And when it was close enough, when it was standing right next to you in the picture, that was when it could step through. I asked him what it wanted. He said nobody who found out ever lived to tell anyone. I went back to my house because I had nowhere else to go. Every photograph was gone. The walls were empty. I checked my phone. All the pictures I had taken earlier were deleted. I told myself maybe I had imagined all of it. Stress, isolation, the darkness playing tricks. Then I walked past the mirror in the bathroom and saw it standing behind me. Tall and thin and featureless. So close I could feel cold radiating from it. I spun around. Nothing there, but when I looked back at the mirror, it was even closer. Its hand was reaching toward my shoulder. I smashed the mirror with my fist. Glass exploded across the bathroom floor, and blood ran down my hand. I covered every reflective surface in my house with towels and blankets. I taped cardboard over the bathroom mirror, the microwave door, the glass on the picture frames, even though the pictures were gone. That was 4 days ago. I have not left my house since. I keep the lights on constantly, but they do not help. I can feel it in here with me now, not in the photographs anymore. Those were just doorways, ways for it to study me, to find me, to get close enough to cross over. Now it is behind me when I turn too quickly. It is in the peripheral vision that vanishes when I try to look directly at it. It is the cold spot in the bedroom, the shadow that moves wrong, the sound of breathing that is not my own. I found more photographs this morning, not on the walls, under my pillow, pictures of me sleeping, taken from above, from angles that should be impossible. And in every single photo, the figure is in bed with me, lying next to me, its face inches from mine. I think I understand now what happened to Thomas Whitmore. I think his wife and kids are not missing. I think they were replaced. I think the thing in the photographs took them, and Thomas was the only one who could see it, the only one who knew they were gone. He tried to show people by drawing over their faces, tried to prove that the thing was real, that it had taken everyone he loved. The sun comes back in 22 days. I do not think I have that long. Last night, I woke up holding a pencil, and there were drawings on the walls. The same featureless figure, over and over again, surrounding a crude sketch of a man who looked like me. I did not draw them. I know I did not. But the pencil was in my hand, and there was graphite under my fingernails. I am writing this down because I need someone to know what happened here. If you are listening to this, if you ever find yourself in Utqiagvik during the polar night, do not bring photographs. Do not look in mirrors. Do not try to capture the darkness on camera or film, because something lives in those spaces between light and shadow, something that has been here far longer than this town, longer than the people who built it. And it is very good at pretending to be human. It studies us through our own images, learns how we move and speak and think. And when the darkness is deep enough and long enough, it can step out of the photographs and take our place. I heard scratching on my door an hour ago. When I looked through the peephole, I saw myself standing outside. Same face, same clothes, same everything. Except the eyes were wrong. Too dark, too empty. And behind my doppelganger, I could see others. Thomas Whitmore, his wife and children, dozens of other people I recognized from around town, all standing in the darkness, all staring at my door. The scratching has stopped now. I think they are waiting for me to come out, or maybe they are waiting for me to fall asleep so they can come in. I've been awake for 60 hours. I cannot stay awake forever. If you are reading this, if someone finds this after I am gone, do not believe whatever is wearing my face. It is not me. I will be somewhere else, somewhere dark and cold and endless, trapped in the space between photographs, watching the world through other people, just cameras, waiting for my chance to step through. The thing is right behind me now. I can see it reflected in my blank computer screen. It is smiling. I did not know it could smile. 22 days until the sun comes back. But I do not think the sun ever really left. I think I am the one who went somewhere else. Somewhere the light cannot reach. Story 10. Dolls of St. Paul Island. I found the first doll 3 hours after my boat ran aground on the rocks. It was standing upright in the sand, about 4 feet tall, made from driftwood and something else. Something that looked like stretched skin. The face was carved with deliberate care. Too much care. It had my nose. My exact nose. The same crooked break from a bar fight in Anchorage 2 years ago. My name is David Marsh. I am a wildlife photographer, and I was supposed to spend 2 weeks documenting the seal colonies in the Pribilof Islands. St. Paul Island was my first stop. Population 73, according to my research. A dying community of descendants from Russian and Aleut seal hunters who had been trapped here for generations by economics and tradition. The GPS had failed 20 miles out. Then the radio. Then the engine started coughing like it had seawater in the fuel line. By the time I saw the rocks, it was too late to do anything but hold on and pray. I dragged myself onto the beach, soaking wet, watching my boat sink into the dark Bering Sea. The island stretched before me, all volcanic rock and scrub grass under a gray sky that looked like it had never seen the sun. I could see the village about a mile up the coastline. Small houses clustered together. No lights, no smoke from chimneys, nothing moving. That's when I saw the doll watching me. I told myself it was just driftwood. Some kid's art project. But as I got closer, my stomach turned. The joints were articulated. The hands had fingers made from what I realized were seal bones, wrapped in some kind of translucent membrane. Seal gut, maybe. Something the old hunters would have used. And the face. God, the face kept drawing my eye back. Because it really did look like me. I picked it up. It was heavier than it should have been. The head turned slightly in my grip, and I dropped it like it had burned me. It hit the sand and stayed there, face up, those carved wooden eyes staring at the sky. I ran toward the village. The first house I reached had the door wide open. I called out. Nothing. Inside, the place was neat. Almost too neat. A coffee cup sat on the table, still half full. A jacket hung on a chair. The television was off, but when I touched it, the screen was warm. Someone had been watching it recently. Very recently, but there was no one there. I checked 4 more houses. Same thing. Meals half eaten. Beds unmade like people had just gotten up. A shower still dripping. But no people. No bodies. No signs of struggle. Just absence. And dolls. In the second house, I found one sitting at the kitchen table. This one was smaller, shaped like a woman with long dark hair made from dried seaweed. It was positioned in front of a bowl of soup. In the third house, a doll sat in a recliner facing the television. In the fourth house, 2 dolls stood by the stove, one with its driftwood arms extended like it was cooking. Each one was unique, different heights, different features carved into their wooden faces. And each one was doing something. Not just standing there, they were posed in the middle of actions. Daily routines. I found myself counting them as I went house to house. 17, 23, 41. By the time I reached the community center at the center of the village, I had counted 73 dolls. The exact population of the island. The community center was the largest building, and its doors were also wide open. Inside, more dolls were arranged in a circle, like they were having a meeting. In the middle of the circle sat something that made my throat close up. A carving station, fresh wood shavings on the floor, sharp knives laid out carefully, and on the workbench, a half-finished doll. It was child-sized. I picked up one of the knives. The handle was worn smooth from use. How long had the villagers been making these things? And why did they look so much like specific people? I found the answer in a journal left open on a desk in the corner. The handwriting was shaky, barely legible in some places. It belonged to someone named Mikhail Petrov. The entries went back 6 months. December 3rd. The winter is harder this year. We are more alone than ever. The supply ship came late. Many of us wonder if it will come at all next year. We make the dolls to remember that we are still here, to remember that we exist. December 27th. Yuri has started talking to his doll. He made it look like his daughter in Seattle. He hasn't seen her in 8 years. Sometimes I hear him arguing with it at night. January 15th. Something strange is happening. Anna's doll moved. I know how that sounds, but I saw it. She left it by the window, and when she came back, it was by the door. She laughed it off, said she must have forgotten, but I saw her face. She was scared. February 2nd, we don't talk about the dolls anymore, but we all keep making them. It's like we can. Stop. I am working on mine now. I look at it and I see myself, not just my face, something deeper, like it knows me. February 19th, 3 people left the island this morning on a fishing boat. They said they couldn't stay anymore. They burned their dolls before they left. We found the ashes on the beach. By evening, the dolls were back. Not burned, perfect, standing where they had been before. March 7th, the dolls are moving on their own now. Everyone sees it. No one says anything. We just keep making more. We can't help it. When I try to stop, my hands cramp and my head pounds until I pick up the knife again. The entries ended there. March 7th, 6 months ago, I dropped the journal and backed toward the door. That's when I heard it. A sound like wood scraping on wood, coming from deeper in the building. I should have run. Instead, I followed the sound. The back room of the community center was a storage area. Shelves lined the walls, and on every shelf sat more dolls. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all sizes. Some looked ancient, their wood dark and cracked. Others looked fresh, the pale color of newly carved driftwood. And in the center of the room, on a large table, something was moving. It was a doll, roughly my height. Its driftwood body was mostly complete, but the face was still being carved. And it was carving itself. The wooden hands held a small knife, working methodically at the features. As I watched, frozen, it carved a crooked line into the nose. The same break I had. The same break the doll on the beach had. It stopped, the head turned toward me. Empty eye sockets, not yet carved with pupils. But I felt it looking at me, seeing me. Then it reached for another piece of driftwood. I ran. I burst out of the community center and into the street, gasping for air. The village was silent except for the wind and the distant crash of waves. I looked around frantically, trying to figure out which direction led back to the beach. That's when I realized something that made my blood turn to ice. All 73 dolls were now outside. They lined the street, standing in doorways, positioned on porches, watching, and they had all turned to face me. I sprinted toward the beach. Behind me, I heard that sound again. Wood on wood, scraping, dragging, getting closer. I didn't look back. I just ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out. The beach was ahead, empty except for the doll I found when I first arrived. My doll, it was standing now, upright, facing the village like it was waiting for something. I splashed into the freezing water, wading out until it was up to my waist. My boat was gone, sunk, but maybe I could swim to one of the other islands. Maybe I could flag down a passing ship. Anything to get away from this place. That is when I felt it. Something brushing against my leg underwater. Something hard and wooden. I looked down into the dark water. Dozens of shapes were rising from the depths. Driftwood arms reaching out. Seal gut skin rippling in the current. They were coming up from the seafloor, where they must have been waiting for someone new to arrive. I scrambled back to shore, coughing and shaking. The dolls from the village were closer now. A slow, inevitable march down to the beach, moving in that strange jerking way, like puppets with invisible strings. I'm writing this on a piece of paper I found in my waterproof bag. It's been 3 days. I'm in one of the houses now, hiding, but I know it won't matter. I just started carving. I can help it. My hands move on their own, finding driftwood, finding the tools. The doll is almost finished. It looks exactly like me. I understand now what happened to the villagers. They didn't leave. They still here. They still going through their routines. They never stopped being the community. They just became something else. Something that doesn't need food or warmth or connection to the outside world. Something that just is. Last night, I walked through the village. All 73 dolls were in their houses, doing what they always do. Cooking, watching television, sitting at tables, living their lives. And I realized they weren't empty. I could feel the presence of the villagers inside them. Trapped maybe, or transformed. I'm not sure that's a difference anymore. This morning, I found my doll sitting at the table in this house. Waiting. It's more detailed now. The eyes have pupils. The mouth has teeth. It's nearly complete. I can feel myself fading. Like I am being slowly copied, translated into driftwood and seal gut and the cold logic of something that exists without needing to exist. My thoughts are becoming simpler. My memories are flattening into routines. Soon I'll finish the carving. Soon it'll take my place with the others. Population 74. And we'll wait together for the next person who washes up on our shore. Because the island needs to grow. The community needs to continue. That's what communities do. They persist. They adapt. They find ways to survive in the isolation. Even if survival means becoming something that was never meant to be alive. The dolls are patient. They have all the time in the world. And when you finally arrive, cold and desperate and grateful to find shelter, we'll be here. Going through our routines, looking almost human in the dim light, until you look closer, until you see your own face staring back at you from driftwood and shadow, until you pick up the knife and start to carve. Story 11. Whiteout entity. I should have turned back the moment I saw what Mark was drawing in his journal. We were 3 days into our Denali summit attempt when the storm hit. February 2002. I was part of a 4-man climbing team. All of us experienced enough to know better than to push our luck in the Alaska range during winter. But summit fever is real, and we had come too far to quit. Mark, our team leader, assured us we had a weather window. He was wrong. The whiteout descended on us at 17,000 feet like someone had thrown a sheet over the world. One moment I could see the ridgeline ahead, but next, nothing, just white, complete, disorienting white in every direction. No up, no down, no horizon. The wind screamed so loud I couldn't to hear Dave shouting 3 feet away from me. We dug in, set up our emergency shelter, waited for the storm to pass. That was supposed to take hours, maybe a day. It took 6. By the second night, things started getting strange. The wind had this quality to it, this rhythm that almost sounded like breathing. Long, slow inhales, then nothing, then exhale that rattled the tent walls. I kept checking my oxygen levels, thinking maybe I was hypoxic, that my brain was playing tricks. But the gauge read fine. Mark started drawing on the 3rd day. I woke up to find him sitting cross-legged in his sleeping bag, headlamp on, sketching something in his journal with intense focus. His pencil moved in quick, frantic strokes. When I asked what he was doing, he didn't answer. Just kept drawing, over and over, the same image, a tall figure, impossibly thin, made of what looked like swirling lines, like wind-given form. And in the center, where a face should be, just a dark circle. A void. I thought it was altitude sickness. Cerebral edema, maybe. But Mark, his pupils were fine. His speech was clear. He just kept drawing. Then Dave started drawing it too. I found him that afternoon with Mark, his journal, copying the same figure into the margins of our route map. When I confronted him, he looked at me like I was the crazy one. "You Haven, you seen it yet?" he asked. "It is out there. In the white. It's always been out there." That is when I noticed Brandon was gone. Our 4th climber, the youngest of us at 28. I had assumed he was in the 2nd tent, riding out the storm with our backup gear. But when I crawled through the connecting tunnel, the tent was empty. His sleeping bag was there, still zipped up and arranged like someone was sleeping in it. But no Brandon. I radioed for help immediately. Denali Rangers told us to sit tight, that they couldn't launch a rescue until the storm cleared. Wind speeds were over 70 miles per hour. Visibility 0. We were on our own. Mark didn't seem concerned about Brandon. He just kept drawing. "It took him already," he said, not looking up from his journal. "It takes one every time. That's the pattern." I demanded to know what he was talking about. What pattern? What was taking people? But Mark had gone somewhere else in his mind. His eyes had this faraway look, like he was watching something I couldn't see. The wind changed that night. I don't know how to explain it properly. The sound shifted from a howl to something more structured, more deliberate. It started to sound less like wind and more like someone breathing directly outside our tent. Right against the fabric. Long, slow breaths that made the walls expand inward and then suck back out. I grabbed my headlamp and unzipped the vestibule. The white outside wasn't just snow anymore. It was moving, swirling in patterns that defied the wind direction, spiraling around something tall, something that stood just beyond the reach of my headlamp beam. I saw it for maybe 3 seconds before my brain refused to process what I was looking at. The human mind isn't built to comprehend certain shapes, certain proportions. This thing was too thin to exist, too tall to stand in wind like this. And its face, if you could call it that, was a hole. Not a mouth or eyes, just an opening that led somewhere else. Somewhere dark and infinite and very, very cold. I fell backward into the tent and zipped the vestibule shut with shaking hands. Mark was watching me, smiling. "Now you've seen it," he said. "Now you understand." I didn't understand anything. My training told me this was high-altitude cerebral edema. HACE, hallucinations brought on by low oxygen and swelling in the brain. But I had checked our gear. Our oxygen was fine. The altitude shouldn't be affecting us like this. We had all summited higher peaks before. Dave was drawing again. He had found a marker somewhere and was sketching the figure directly onto the tent wall. The lines were precise, practiced, like he had drawn it 1,000 times before in dreams. He couldn't. You remember? "It wants to show us something," Dave said. His voice was flat, emotionless. "It's been waiting up here for so long, waiting for someone to see." I tried to stay rational. I checked our supplies. We had food for 3 more days. Water for 2 if we rationed. The storm had to break eventually. Denali Rangers would reach us. We just had to hold on. But the breathing outside didn't stop. And every time I closed my eyes, I saw that hole. That dark, infinite opening where a face should be. By the 4th day, I was drawing it too. I don't remember starting. I found myself with Mark's journal in my lap, my hands moving on autopilot, sketching that same tall figure, that same spiral of wind and snow, that same void. And the strangest part was how right it felt, how familiar, like I was remembering something instead of imagining it. It's always been here, Mark said. He was staring at the tent wall, at nothing. Before us, before the mountain. It existed in the spaces between things, in the white, in the nothing. And it's lonely. That is what terrified me most. Not that this thing was hostile, but that it was lonely, that it had been alone in this frozen white emptiness for longer than human comprehension. And now it had found us. And it wanted us to stay. The rescue team reached us on the 6th day. By then we had run out of water. Our lips were cracked and bleeding. Our fingers showed early signs of frostbite, but the physical damage wasn't what alarmed them. They found us huddled together in the main tent, all three of us drawing. The entire tent interior was covered in sketches, hundreds of them, the same figure rendered over and over in pencil, marker, even blood from our cracked fingers. The same spiral of wind, the same dark void. They asked where Brandon was. None of us could answer. We just kept drawing. The search teams found no trace of him. No body, no equipment scattered by wind. No tracks, nothing. He had simply vanished into the white, like he had never existed at all. They evacuated us by helicopter once the weather cleared. The doctors diagnosed us with severe haze and exposure-induced psychosis. They said our brains had been starved of oxygen, that we had experienced shared delusions brought on by altitude and isolation. They kept us sedated for 3 days while our bodies recovered. But here is what they couldn't explain. After we were discharged, after we had returned to sea level and our oxygen saturation was perfect and our brains had healed, we kept drawing. Mark filled 17 journals in the first month. Dave covered every wall of his apartment before his family had him committed. And me, I tried to stop. I tried to forget what I saw in that whiteout. But every night, I dream of the white. And in those dreams, I can hear it breathing. That same slow, deliberate rhythm. And I understand what it wants now. What it has always wanted. It wants to be seen, to be remembered, to be drawn into our world through the act of recognition. And we gave it that. 6 months after Denali, Mark walked into a snowstorm in Montana and never came back. 2 years later, Dave disappeared during a winter camping trip in the Rockies. Both times, during whiteout conditions. Both times, their last known drawings showed the same figure, but more detailed now, more complete, like it was becoming more real with each rendering. I am the only one left, and I can feel it pulling at me, especially in winter, especially when the snow falls heavy and the world turns white. I see it in the spaces between snowflakes, that tall, impossible shape, that dark, infinite void. I know I don't have much time. Soon I'll follow Mark and Dave and Brandon into the white, into whatever that thing is, whatever space it occupies between existence and nothing. But before I go, I needed to tell someone. I needed to explain what is waiting up there on Denali. What has always been waiting in the white, in the cold, in the places where the world becomes nothing but empty space. It is still there, still lonely, still breathing, still waiting for someone else to see it. And the worst part, the part that keeps me awake every night, scratching that same figure into paper until my fingers bleed. I think I want to go back. I think part of me never really left. Part of me is still up there, in that tent, drawing with Mark and Dave. Still trying to understand what we saw. Still trying to make it more real. They say the mountain doesn't to give up its dead. But I don't. Did think we were dead. I think we re something else now. Something in between. Something that exists in the white spaces, where reality gets thin and other things can break through. Sometimes, late at night, I can hear Brandon's voice in the wind. He is calling to us, telling us it's not so bad, that the loneliness stops once you let go, once you become part of the white. I think I'll listen to him soon. I think I'll go back to Denali, back to that ridge at 17,000 feet, back to where the thing waits in its whiteout. Because here is the truth they dawn. We tell you about Denali, about the Alaska range, about any mountain that pierces high enough into the sky. Up there, where the air gets thin and the world turns white and the boundaries between what is real and what is not begin to dissolve, things live that we were never meant to see. And once they've seen them, they never let you go. I started packing my gear, planning my route. The weather forecast shows a massive storm system moving toward Denali next week. Perfect whiteout conditions. I'll go alone this time. No team to slow me down. No one else to infect with what I carry. Just me and the white and the thing that breathes in the spaces between snowflakes. I wonder if it will remember me. If it's been drawing me too, somewhere in that infinite dark where it lives. I think it has. I think they've been drawing each other all along, pulling each other closer, making each other more real with every line and shadow and void we sketch into existence. The mountain is calling, the white is waiting, and I'm finally ready to answer. And so the whisper fades into the wind. Alaska keeps its secrets under ice, but sometimes, for a moment, it lets us peek inside. If you haven't already, subscribe and tap that bell. More true stories and legends wait in the dark. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from, or if you felt the chill of something unexplainable yourself. Share it in the comments. Midnight Whispers isn't just a channel, it's a campfire across the miles, burning in the endless night. Until next time, stay warm and keep your lights low.